Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and there are a lot of Robot Masters. Over 100 if we rope in some of the spin-off stuff, and while I like most of them, there are some that I do more than others. There can be only one, though, that can rise to the top and claim the spot as my absolute fave. No wait, sorry, I was holding the list upside down. Probably should have figured when it was hard to read. Okay, so while there are some duds among the RMs, I think there's only one that I hate enough that I would erase his existence if I could, and that's Oil Man. And while that might seem harsh or hyperbolic, I swear to you, I have plenty of ammo against the guy. Enough for a whole video, in fact. So to all you diehard fans, my apologies in advance. For everyone else who hasn't played Powered Up, strap in. Okay, so let's start with the elephant in the room. Or maybe not. I might not want to tread on that topic this early in. Instead, he's a video game character, so let's talk video games. Oil Man's weapon is the oil slider, where he plops out a puddle of oil and if you step on it, you'll slide ahead until you hit a wall, or cancel it with an X plus up, which you definitely know because you read the manual, right? If you didn't, you might find yourself helplessly holding back, delaying your inevitable crash into a set of spikes. But anyway, this is actually pretty good if you want to get through an area fast, so you could say that it's the speedrun move, since someone wanting to utilize it in that way would likely know a simple cancel command, as well as the general layout of the stage. And now that I've mentioned the positives, I can say I gave him a fair shake and move on to the negatives, pretty much everything else. So, if you want to use the oil slider offensively, you have one of three options. The first is to hop on and crash into enemies. The problem is this is a game with contact damage and it gives you no iframes. For smaller baddies, the front of it can wipe them out. Robot Masters are a little more tricky though. You need some really precise jumps so that you just skim their heads with the bottom of the board while avoiding them directly yourself. If they're camping the corner or you knock them back into one, you'll wind up falling into them when you hit the wall. For bigger enemies though, there's no real way around this drawback, other than keeping precise track of the remaining health and only using the dash for the final hit. No, unless I'm missing something, the best way to deal with enemies that take multiple hits is the second method of attack, just shooting them with oil. And maybe that seems obvious, but his weapon is bound by gravity, so you need to be at least a little close and angle it correctly or it'll hit the floor long before it reaches them. Which ties into the other issue. You can only have one of these things out at once. If you miss, you either need to find a chance to run up and grab the slider to crash it into a wall and reset it, move so that it goes off screen, wait for it to despawn, or use the third method of attack, laying one down like a landmine for opponents that move around. I actually kinda like that last one, though the chances you get to actually use it that way are pretty limited. Anyway, if you're hitting something with it directly, it does very little damage. Only ramming speed or using it against a Lek-Man will do anything more than chip damage. Even weak enemies that should go down in one will take multiple hits if you just keep dripping globs on them. What we have here is a weapon that's very hard to use, doing little damage unless you're willing to tank some yourself, and can leave you high and dry if you whiff. While you might be able to get through the levels quick, some of these bosses can take a painfully long time to get through. Oil also doesn't mix with water, so if you try to fire it off underwater, it'll just float to the top, though you can ride it to skim the surface, quickly getting through some parts of Iceman's level, as well as this one Wily stage where, damn it! Now compare that to when it's used against you. On normal mode, Oil Man can leap up and fire 3, not 1, but 3 oil sliders at you that will stay on the floor for a few seconds. While Oil Man is immune, if you try to walk on these, you'll slip and fall, which is annoying. For his super attack, he'll slide around on his oil board, naturally being invincible now that it's being used against you. And while it's not too hard of a boss fight, at the same time, he's loads better compared to when you get to play as him. It's like when you recruit a powerful boss in an RPG and then suddenly they become mediocre when they join your party. Well, here it's more annoying to trash rather than invincible to okay, but still. And when Wily uses it, oh ho ho. The Wily machine in this one swaps between the different special weapons, and for the most part, they function pretty much the same. While the oil slider still plops down and becomes a fall hazard, its rate of fire is pretty different. Dude shoots it off a half dozen times on stage 1 and like 16 times on stage 2, which makes it so that you have to dodge around primarily by jumping, since trying to walk on an oil-soaked floor will cause the slip and fall to happen, but also causes some pretty major slowdown. And while slowdown is a pretty standard part of the Mega Man experience, this is ridiculous and really rubs it in just how pathetic your version of the weapon is. Now this is a more bombastic comparison. It's like getting a single-shot musket when your opponent has an AK and they try to tell you it's the same. For one other point against him, he's weak to Firestorm, and outside of Mega Man, Fireman's the best Robot Master in the game. Honestly, with his infinite use of a spammy attack with an extra ball of fire spinning around him and functioning like a shield, I'm almost tempted to put him at the top. Even if they don't give him the orbiting fireball in his fight, he can still be overwhelming, so being the hardest character to use, and going up against perhaps the fiercest, while taking extra damage and doing little yourself, is not an enviable position. Continuing on with gameplay, there's this stage which is just fine. It is the most just fine level in the game, to the point where it leaves very little impression on me. Both Oil and Time Man have their work cut out for them on this one, since pretty much everything else is taken from Mega Man 1 on NES, and thus even the weaker stages and themes have nostalgia working for them, but these two have to earn their place. In my opinion, Time Man does. While his stage shares enemies with the rest of the game, he's also got these pendulums you have to dodge around, some tricky jumps and timing to navigate, and even has a more vertical stage, so that if you flub some of your leaps, you can see yourself getting Jump King down a floor. Oil Man has mets with cactus hats, which is something, but otherwise, you mostly just walk to the right or climb upwards, while avoiding the same basic traps over and over. There are oil floors that you have to jump across, because walking over them will cause you to fall on your butt. If they get hit with fire, they'll light up for a little bit, then just turn into regular surfaces when they go out, so it's like Flame Man's, but more forgiving. There are some canisters that can either be helpful or get in your way that can be blown up with fire, and like in every standard stage, there's a few other secrets if you come in with the right power or character. If you're playing normally though, you're just gonna get a bunch of screens where you have to dodge around attacks from shopmen and change key makers, being very careful to try to bait the latter's flames so that they either don't light up the floor and force you to wait for them to burn out, or do that exact thing purposefully to traverse the level safely. Just rearranged a little bit to avoid them being actually copy-pasted, with a big eye at the end, just because. While I remember the layouts of the other stages pretty well, I had to go back and review this one to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything, but no, unless you have the Thunder Beam, it's pretty repetitive. And for one last dig, the music is pleasant enough. I enjoy it, but if I had to rank the OST, this one would be near, if not the bottom. Can't even let him have his tunes, can I? Lore-wise, how big of a dud he is kinda depends on your source. In the games, he was designed to produce a special oil that works with any machine, which works well with the more commercial category that the original set of Robot Masters fit into. Personality, he comes across as laid back and friendly. When confronting another Robot Master, he's typically the level of abrasive that you'd expect from a boss, but when you play as him, he mostly just tries to get them to calm down. And while I want to say that he's too careless and flippant, I think if I wasn't already annoyed at him for all the other reasons, I probably would find him a likable guy. Luckily, there's the Archie comics to help justify my irritation. In that, he's meant to help clean up oil spills, which is great, but he spends the whole Time Keeps on Slippin' arc where he's introduced just leaving the stuff everywhere, like a Roomba that spreads dirt rather than sucking it up. Not only that, but they have specific orders, which Time Man follows meticulously, but Oil Man carries out willy-nilly, causing a good bit of trouble for his compatriot. Which is good since they're doing this all for Wily, but still, annoying. To keep things fair though, his looser standards do allow him to bend some rules and really help out when a cruise ship runs aground in a one-off, but 4 issues of being a pain compared to 1 where it almost comes off like he's hitting on his maybe sisters doesn't quite balance things. Then again, he does call Time Man baby too, So maybe it's not flirting. Unless... Oh, he also gets bonus points for being able to understand and joke with the Yellow Devil. Now let's finally talk about the obvious thing, or maybe not so obvious if you don't keep up with video game controversies and localization changes. So, this is Oilman's original design, and this is a racist depiction of a black person in old cartoons. The latter is not exactly flattering, and the former has some pretty distinct similarities, so you can see why this was changed. And to be fair, this wasn't necessarily meant to be seen this way. Bit of a sensitive topic, so please just hear me out and make your own judgment, but Oilman having dark black skin with a sheen to it makes sense since this is the color of oil. Sometimes anime characters also just have big lips, regardless of race, Dex from Battle Network being a good example of this, and these typically make them look goofy and hard to take seriously. With Oilman being a lot more laid back and less serious than many of his peers, especially the uptight Time Man that he was introduced alongside of, it does kind of fit his personality. So it's possible that both of these traits, inoffensive and logical on their own, were just kind of coincidentally combined and the result had some pretty unfortunate associations. On the flip side though, here are some examples of black people in Japanese media. Let's be honest, none of these are winning any awards for sensitivity. Though if I wanted to defend this as well, I could try blaming us instead. There was a period where blackface was pretty popular in cartoons, and American media has been known to be a pretty big influence on some Japanese creators. Maybe they just happened to watch the wrong old Disney film or episode of Tom and Jerry, and being as homogenous a society as they were, just thought that this was the way people with darker skin were drawn, like when you repeat an offensive word you heard because you thought you understood it based on context, but didn't get the deeper implications. I have seen it coming up less and less in Japanese media, black characters in Dragon Ball going from looking like this to just people with darker skin, and Mr. Popo being retconned to being a demon rather than human. Even then though, you could argue that people always knew this was bad and just started cutting down on it when a bigger interest was taken in their entertainment, and they knew they couldn't get away with it anymore. Like racists who behave in public so that they don't lose their jobs or become ostracized. So there's a few ways you can interpret this, as racism, coincidence, ignorance, or just oversensitivity. Unless you get a quote from Minafune stating things one way or another, I'm leaning bad but not willing to outright condemn as malicious, though I'm certainly glad that they changed it. First to a more bluish black with yellow lips, then Archie not being comfortable even with that redesign and just mandating that the guy always have his scarf wrapped around his mouth so that no one would ever get a glimpse of whatever sort of kisser he has now. And regardless of where you land on this one, I think we can all agree on one thing. This is really awkward, isn't it? This is video games, a leisure activity. I should be talking about how fun they are, or what I think they could do better. Not sit here trying to explain whether they're racist or woke or whatever. By trying to explain both sides, I risk the ire of everyone. It's sounding like I'm making excuses to some, like I'm a whiny little crybaby getting upset on someone else's behalf to others. And whose fault is it we're in this position? Oilman. Well, no, that's not true. He didn't create himself, it's Dr. Light's fault. Or, if we want to get real, Keiji Inafune's. At the same time though, while I wouldn't blame the child and suggest we lock them away, just because of how their creepy stare or the way they pronounce mischievous makes everyone uncomfortable, Oilman's a fictitious character, in a remake that no one played. We can just pretend this never happened. He has no feelings to hurt. And you know what? Oilman never did need to happen. There were always other possibilities. I could sit here and bullcrap you about how most of the Robot Masters in the next game were patterned after the ones from the first, just weaponized. Quickman and Metal Man after Cutman, Heatman after Fire, Crash after Bomb, etc. They made the most of this with Time Man. Flashman just kinda came out of nowhere with the ability to stop time, so a robot predating him that can just slow it down makes a lot of sense. I guess if we really wanted to stretch things, we could say that Bubble Man and Oil Man are similar, since both have weapons that move along the floor, are liquid-based, and maybe poisonous. Is it Bubble Lead or Bubble Lead? Either way, I wouldn't recommend swallowing one of those or the oil slider. My point is they just could have designed a new Robot Master that tied into one of the twos, like Woodman. But hey, that would all be filler to build up to what I actually want to say here. We could have had Bondman. Bondman was a robot master that was meant to be in the original game, but was cut. He was adhesive based, his glue stopping Mega Man and also enemies in place, which was then transferred to the Ice Slasher. We do have this picture done by Hitoshi Ariga based on a description he was given by Inafune. If you're an older fan who's deep in the weeds on oddball trivia, he's probably the most wanted scrapped RM, even more so than Honey Woman. Some fan games have even brought him in. Inafune considered using him for Powered Up, but I guess he was worried that Bondman would lose some of his legendary status if he did, so he went with Time and Oil, and I really wish we'd have just gotten him. Maybe I should just look at Concrete Man as new Bondman. But still, Oil Man was another cut design, you might say if you know your stuff. And while you're right, the original sketch had a more standard looking robot with some sort of pipe coming from behind him. So if you stuck closer to that, we might not have only had a more usable weapon, but also sidestepped the whole lips controversy altogether. There's also always the dozens and dozens of unused fan submissions, or even just running a whole new contest. So to say it again, this could have been avoided. Circle Man! Some of these points were a bit more salient than others. Feels like I'm picking on him a bit, bringing his house into it, and I was surprised when I found myself admitting that I might not actually mind hanging out with Oil Man, just if I didn't have to explain his appearance to anyone who happened to see us. I might have been a bit more vehement though had I written this when I originally intended, when I was doing a bunch of playthroughs of Powered Up weekly for over a month, and not only having to deal with the Wily machine spam the oil slider, trying to crash the game, but also knowing who the last character I'd have to play as was, looming over me in the background. He is such a pain to use that, with every other Robot Master, I'd play Powered Up on normal except when I had to fight whoever was strong against them, but Oil Man I not only had to play the whole game on easy, but before I picked it back up, he was the only one I'd literally never beaten a stage with. It might have made me hear his lines with a lot more flippancy than was likely intended. But unfair or not, I've said my piece, so now to turn it back to you. What do you think of Oil Man? Is he horrible to play as, or do I just not get the tech? What about the other thing? Do I really want to ask about that? And who's your least favorite / most hated Robot Master? That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. Those and indie games, all I'm playing anymore.